At what point is imitation considered art? This is a question I have wrestled with for quite some time whilst playing Dead Space's remake. When Dead Space was first being produced, the development team referred to the project as Resident Evil in Space. Inspired by the culture-defining game that was RE4, the development team set their sights on imitating survival horror's greatest ever release. It's not difficult to see the influences Resident Evil ended up having on Dead Space's gameplay, through the zombie-like necromorphs, linear game design, bosses with glowing yellow weak points, resource management, and even a stalker. And for their setting and story, Dead Space also heavily imitates 1997's Event Horizon, a sci-fi horror film starring a crew on board a ship that descends into madness. From an imitation standpoint, they achieved exactly what their project set out to do. They created a Resident Evil in space that was heavily influenced by existing sci-fi media. In this video, I'm going to show how Dead Space uses imitation of familiar horror ideas to create a deep psychological experience built on isolation, paranoia, and mental instability. And ultimately, this video will show why imitation can be art. Space is a symbol of peace, calmness, and silence. But space also brings the feeling of unknowable, incomprehensible, and insignificance. Specifically, the psychological trope of isolation and loneliness. The USG Ishimura, Dead Space's primary setting, is a spaceship designed for a massive-scale mining operation of planet cracking to prevent Earth's resource collapse. It is a piece of machinery that establishes the feats humanity has reached within the Dead Space universe. However, from the moment we approach the Ishimura, this sense of power is questioned. The automatic docking fails, forcing us to crash land. Such an entrance immediately establishes a loss of safety and control that surrounds the ship. Even when we step aboard, we are instantly met with a flickering sign of the ship's name, a commonly known foreshadowing that things are not quite in order. These small cues we receive at the start of the game instantly put us at an unease before anything has really begun, and as we know, it will be a major tell for what is about to occur. Once inside the Ishimura, you cannot help but be blown away by the aesthetic design of the ship. The combination of dim lighting, deep shadows, and the cold glow of space creates an environment that feels almost dreamlike, yet deeply unsettling. The game borrows heavily from the visualizations of Event Horizon and Alien. Side by side, you can tell just how much the development team was inspired by these movies. They also drew clear inspiration from Resident Evil. The ship's layout is comprised of interconnected corridors and enclosed rooms. This maze-like structure, a now established genre convention, restricts player movement and visibility, intensifying feelings of confinement and vulnerability. The narrow corridors function as confined spaces where threat is anticipated around every corner, but not always visible, exploiting the player's imagination to create an atmosphere that visualizes psychological dread. This atmosphere is constructed through the game's art design. The Ishimura is designed by merging the oppressive qualities of industrial brutalism with the sterile precision of advanced technology. The brutalist elements, exposed metal, heavy machinery, and vast spaces create a sense of confinement where the player feels dominated by the environment rather than in control of it. These overwhelming structures evoke a form of isolation in the idea of being trapped alone within an indifferent mechanical system. Throughout your playthrough, you will notice that the Ishimura is decaying. Years of neglect, combined with the biological corruption of the hive, have left this mechanical infrastructure rusted and deteriorating. This visible decay reinforces themes of abandonment and contamination, transforming the ship from a place of function into something unstable. That instability is a metaphor to portray Isaac's and us the player's psychological deteriorating mind, a theme I will explore heavily later on in this video. But the developers have used this metaphor throughout each chapter of the game. The ship visibly decays further and further. They have clearly emphasized that as the Ishimura continues to decay, there is no sense of escape, only deeper movement into the ever-growing living structure. I can't explain how chilling this simple melody is when you first hear it. For those of you who have played Dead Space, you know exactly what I mean. The last time I heard this nursery rhyme was when I was a child, so for the developers to use this innocent children's rhyme creates a deeply unsettling acoustic experience. Something so familiar, so safe, becomes distorted, untrustworthy within our own minds, because we understand that we shouldn't be hearing this right now, not in this context, not in this hell. Sound is without a doubt the most important element of any piece of horror media. It is the most expressive way of conveying how an audience should feel, and Dead Space uses that to convey paranoia and distrust, core themes of psychological horror. Dead Space absolutely understands the importance of sound, in which the game gives us some of the best sound design I have ever experienced from a game. It achieves what I would describe as a constant unease, and I mean constant. No matter where you are or what you're doing on the Ishimura, sounds of horror will echo continuously. This is a direct contrast to Resident Evil. In RE, save rooms always provide a sense of safety and a break from the game, a sort of peaceful reward for embracing the horrors moments before. These rooms always play a calm and tranquil soundtrack, some of the best music of the series. Just take a listen to this. How did that make you feel? Oddly safe, right? Many other games in the survival horror genre have some sort of similar theme when it comes to save rooms, a form of tranquil music that provides some sense of safety in the horror that you're playing. But Dead Space refuses to imitate this. Instead, it establishes a constant sense of unease through its ambient sound design. The ship is never silent. Distant screams, metallic creaks, and the movement of necromorphs within the walls creates the impression that something is always nearby. You are never safe. But how could you be when the very save rooms are the rooms where you were just engaging with the ship's horrors? Your paranoia doesn't allow yourself to trust the game to stop, to even save. Paranoia is a feeling Dead Space continuously relies on. Throughout the Ishimura, Isaac hears whispers, distorted voices, and hallucinated sounds. These are usually never tied to visible events or any explanation. This technique reflects a broader tradition in psychological horror where sound is used to blur the line between reality and perception. Silent Hill 2 uses radio static and distant audio cues to imply danger that may or may not exist. These sounds put the mind under pressure through stress and anxiety. Rather than clearly defined external threat being present visually, one develops in the mind, making us question what is real. Jason Graves, a composer for the original Dead Space, described the score and audio of the game as a way to mirror Isaac's emotional state, to keep the player physically in step with him and feel unease. And Dead Space's attention to detail truly aims at keeping this unease throughout the game. Layers of ambient noise, mechanical hums, and environmental effects combine to create a consistent, unsettling audio landscape. For example, the game has a Alive system which links Isaac's breathing and heartbeat to gameplay scenarios. As his health decreases or stress increases, his breathing becomes heavier and his heartbeat louder. Or even when Isaac receives incoming video calls, something that you would think would be a simple element of the game, instead the developers turn it into a loud, distorted radio static that plays and scares you every single time. No. These are subtle audio cues, but they have a strong effect on the playing experience. The player begins to mirror these responses, creating a physical sense of tension, making the experience feel more immediate and personal, psychologically impactful. In Event Horizon, Justin, the rookie of the crew, decides to approach the warp core and is pulled through the supposed abyss. When the crew finally manage to pull him out, he returns a shadow of himself in complete paralysis. Later in the movie, when Justin finally seems to recover from this paralysis, he runs away and locks himself into the ship's outside airlock and chooses to open the door to space. Problem is, he's not wearing a spacesuit.
Justin is in the airlock and he is not wearing a suit.
An act of suicide. What makes this scene so interesting is that the villain, the evil of the movie, is nowhere to be seen, heard, or even understood at this point. Yet it has had a major psychological impact on one of the characters of the movie. What this scene portrayed was the psychological trope of mental instability and madness caused by an external force. Mental instability refers to the gradual erosion of a character's ability to think, perceive, and act rationally. Madness, by contrast, is usually the end state of that process. It represents a complete break from reality and loss of control over the self. At this point, the character is no longer governed by their own logic. Much like in Event Horizon, where exposure to the Abyss strips characters of their sanity, the marker in Dead Space functions as a catalyst for psychological collapse within the game. It is an alien artifact that emits a powerful electromagnetic signal affecting human minds. It induces hallucinations, paranoia, and violent insanity in those exposed to it, and is responsible for creating the necromorphs. In short, it's responsible for all the crazy shit that goes on in the game. Dead Space relies heavily on suicidal imagery and themes to convey the true psychological evil of the marker. Across the game, the player encounters hanged crewmates, acts of violent self-mutilation, and ritualized sacrifices. Suicide is an act the player instinctively understands, requiring little narrative explanation. However, this familiarity is what the game exploits. While suicide is typically associated with internal struggle or personal belief, Dead Space complicates this assumption by suggesting that these acts are not entirely self-determined. Under the influence of the marker, suicide is used as imagery to show a loss of autonomy. It draws directly in comparison to the overall depiction in Just and Seen in Event Horizon. This idea that even the most fundamental human instinct, survival, can be overridden, and that is deeply unsettling. Dead Space relies on the imagery of religion to deliver this message further. Developed from the finding of the Black Marker and death of Altman, is inspired by religious patterns found in certain religions today. This idea of the hidden truth, hierarchical structures, or a form of apocalypse, a cult-like belief. Central to unitology is the concept of convergence, which reframes death as a form of transcendence. This shows that the marker does not just induce madness, it weaponizes the mind, turning internal belief into a mechanism for self-destruction. As a result, madness in Dead Space operates on both a psychological and ideological level, where individuals are not only losing their grip on reality, but also completely surrendering their self. Within the marker's madness, Dead Space also explores repression of trauma and guilt. Characters are forced to confront emotionally unresolved fragments of their own experiences. The marker externalizes grief, guilt, and attachment, turning internal psychological conflict into something physically observable, with the horror emerging not just from what is imagined, but from what the mind can no longer suppress. This is most clearly illustrated through Hammond, the chief security officer, experiences with Chen. After witnessing Chen's death, Hammond repeatedly perceives him within necromorph encounters, producing moments of hesitation where he attempts to reconcile with what he sees with what he believes to be true. This is not simple visual deception, but psychological distortion. The marker exploits Hammond's attachment to Chen, turning grief into a destabilizing force that interrupts judgment.
Chen? What did that thing do to you?
Which ultimately leads to his death. Isaac resists this influence. He recognizes the marker's influence and actively corrects Hammond, grounding him in reality and demonstrating awareness that perception can be manipulated.
Help me get him to the telly.
Shoot. Touch it. Shoot up!
He is often portrayed to be in control over the marker's influence. However, this apparent control is undermined by his own repression surrounding Nicole, because Isaac's instability is actually manifesting through avoidance and selective engagement with truth.
5 minutes out, you still got that thing on repeat? Guess you really miss her.
I always found that line really strange after knowing that Nicole was already dead way before we reached the Ishimura, as revealed near the game's ending. Because rewatching a video and missing the ending of it is not just some random occurrence, it suggests Isaac was seeking control over where the video ends.
Isaac, it's me. Oh, I wish I could talk to you. I'm sorry.
Rather than fully confronting the outcome, Isaac maintains a partial version of events that allows Nicole to live. He suppresses his trauma and guilt of the true events to believe a lie internally. This structure closely aligns with Silent Hill 2, where the narrative is also structured around denial. As James initially clings to the belief that his deceased wife has called him to the town, only for the game to gradually reveal that he has repressed the truth, positioning the player within his distorted perspective and making them complicit in his avoidance. There is also a very similar reveal in Event Horizon, where Captain Miller's abandonment of a crewmate is known by the evil, a fact only he supposedly knew.
I never told anybody. But this ship knew about it.
Just like Event Horizon and Silent Hill 2, Dead Space achieves creating psychological horror through revisiting the truth, the use of reality as a psychological horror.
What the hell did you do?
You did this to yourself. Nicole's been dead this whole time. You just couldn't handle it, could you?
Dead Space is a survival horror that of course can be categorized as also a cosmic or gore horror. But there has been plenty of videos on that, and I couldn't really see a discussion on how well this game does to portray psychological horror. Nothing illustrates this more clearly than the game's ending. After Isaac defeats the hive mind and escapes Aegis 7, the closing scene reveals him being attacked by a hallucination of Nicole, ending the game on a cliffhanger. This suggests that although Isaac has physically escaped the marker, its psychological influence remains, leaving a permanent impact on his mind. This idea is further emphasized in the alternate ending, where Isaac is shown to have completely succumbed to the marker's influence, losing all control over his perception of reality. In this version, psychological collapse is fully realized. These endings can be interpreted as the developers paying homage to two different intentions. The canonical ending respects the continuation of the series and its sequels, but to me, the alternate ending is the developer's true real ending of Dead Space Remake as a standalone game. This ending provides a much more chilling conclusion to the psychological horror established throughout the game, but it makes total sense to the narrative and experiences that Isaac went through.
You'll never recover from what the marker's done to you.
It is an ending that doesn't even feature in the original game. It is one specifically made and chosen by the developers to be put into this remake. And to me, with this ending, the game truly establishes itself as a love letter to psychological horror. Dead Space also imitates one more thing. It imitates itself. The Dead Space remake follows a trend that has defined the last decade of games. Whether you love them or not, we are in the era of remakes. Whenever we get a new remake, the same debate always emerges. Is the remake better than the original? It's a difficult question to answer because recognizing the remake, the imitator as superior is often seen as a dismissal of the original game, as if improvement comes at the cost of offending or even disregarding the original. But those that swear by an original are always labeled as being blinded by nostalgia, unable to see how the modernization of a game clearly outdoes the outdated original. In my opinion, remakes are fundamentally caught in a contradiction. If a game fails to imitate the original, as seen with Resident Evil 3, it is criticized for losing what made the original meaningful. In this sense, imitation becomes necessary to not stray too far from the original and keep older fans happy. But if a remake stays too faithful, it is often criticized for a lack of innovation, for being unnecessary, for offering nothing new. No game has sparked this debate more intensely than Resident Evil 4 and its remake. There is a constant war on which version is better. The original, as I mentioned, is probably the greatest game of all time, one that could stand the test of time and doesn't really need a remake. However, for some, having a modernized game of the original provides an enhancement that they've always wanted in this modern era. But if you really watch and listen to these comparisons, you start to notice that, in the end, the opinion is less about the games themselves and more about how the games make the player feel. The reason Dead Space Remake is my perfect example of when imitation creates art is because it doesn't just imitate the original game. It imitates our memory of it, our memory of how we felt, the unsettling scares, the wonders of space, and the immersion of horror. The developers described the goal of the remake as making players feel like they remembered the original rather than simply replaying it, and I believe they did this perfectly. It is a game that fundamentally stayed absolutely true to the original but improved on so many elements to enhance our memory of the game. It improved the game by implementing a seamless setting, increasing the gore of the dismemberment system, improving the visual fidelity, creating an intensity directed to randomize experiences, and so much more. That's what I think some remakes get wrong. They miss capturing what the original's true feeling was. Dead Space Remake captured that, but it also delivered on how we should have felt by improving the original experience. Because sometimes, the most powerful form of creativity isn't creating something new, it's recreating something we thought we'd never feel again. That is why Dead Space Remake and Imitator is art. Thank you for watching.
The things I would say to the team is we're going to make Resident Evil in space.